Imagine surviving a fall from 30,000 feet without a parachute. Hello, you are on the channel 33 Facts. Here we share amazing stories, scientific misconceptions, and unexplained facts. Get comfortable, let's begin. First case. In 1971, a 17-year-old German girl named Juliane Köpke was flying with her mother over the Peruvian rainforest when lightning struck their plane. The aircraft broke apart at an altitude of over 10,000 feet. Juliane, still strapped to her seat, fell through the sky. She lost consciousness during the fall, but the dense jungle canopy broke her descent. She landed in a small clearing covered in mud and debris with a broken collarbone, a torn ligament in her knee, and cuts all over her body. But she was alive. Her mother and 91 other passengers died instantly. Juliane spent 11 days wandering through the jungle, following a stream until she found a loggers' camp. She had no food, no medical supplies, and her injuries were becoming infected. Maggots were burrowing into her wounds. At the camp, she found fuel and poured it into the wounds to kill the parasites. When the loggers returned, they took her to safety. Experts later said that her survival was a combination of extraordinary luck and the fact that the jungle canopy acted like a series of natural airbags, slowing her fall just enough to prevent fatal impact. And it gets more interesting. Second case. In 2007, a man named Frane Selak from Croatia became known as the world's unluckiest man. Over the course of his life, he survived 7 near-death experiences that would have killed most people. In 1962, he was on a train that derailed and plunged into an icy river. 17 passengers drowned, but Frane escaped with a broken arm and hypothermia. A year later, he was on a plane when a door blew off mid-flight. He was sucked out of the aircraft but landed in a haystack while 19 others died in the crash. In 1966, a bus he was riding skidded off the road and into a river. 4 people drowned, but Frane swam to shore with minor injuries. In 1970, his car caught fire while he was driving. He escaped just before the fuel tank exploded. 3 years later, another car fire. Same result. In 1995, he was hit by a bus in Zagreb but walked away with minor bruises. And in 1996, he was driving in the mountains when he swerved to avoid a truck. His car went off a cliff, but he was thrown out of the door and grabbed onto a tree branch while the vehicle exploded 300 feet below. But wait, the story doesn't end there. In 2003, Frane won the Croatian lottery. The prize was over $1 million. He said that after surviving so many disasters, he felt he had used up all his bad luck and was finally due for something good. Skeptics questioned whether all these events actually happened, but Croatian newspapers confirmed most of the incidents. Some psychologists suggested that Frane might have exaggerated certain details over the years, but there's no denying that he survived multiple situations that statistically should have killed him. He later gave away most of his lottery winnings to family and friends, saying that money didn't matter compared to being alive. Now for the most curious part. Third case. During World War II, a British rear gunner named Nicholas Alcamaide was in a Lancaster bomber over Germany when it was hit by enemy fire. The plane erupted in flames and his parachute was destroyed. Trapped in the tail section with no way out, he made a split-second decision. Jump without a parachute rather than burn alive. He fell 18,000 feet. Witnesses on the ground expected to find a body, but instead they found Alcamaide sitting in a snowbank, dazed but alive. He had crashed through pine trees and landed in deep snow, which cushioned his fall. He suffered only a sprained leg and minor burns. The German soldiers who captured him didn't believe his story until they investigated the wreckage and confirmed that his parachute had indeed been destroyed. They documented the incident and even gave him a certificate confirming his survival. After the war, Alcamaide returned to England and lived until 1987, working as a chemical plant manager. He rarely spoke about the fall, but when he did, he always said the same thing. He felt strangely calm during the descent, as if he had already accepted his fate. And here's what's surprising. Fourth case. In 2012, a woman named Joan Ginther won the Texas lottery 4 times. Her total winnings amounted to over $20 million. Statistically, the odds of winning the lottery 4 times are approximately 1 in 18 septillion. That's a number so large it's almost incomprehensible. Naturally, people suspected something was wrong. Conspiracy theories emerged, claiming she had rigged the system or had inside information. But investigations found no evidence of fraud. Ginther had a PhD in mathematics from Stanford University, and some analysts believe she used statistical models to identify patterns in lottery scratch-off tickets. She reportedly spent months studying which stores sold winning tickets, and at what times. She also bought tickets in bulk, sometimes spending thousands of dollars at a time. While this doesn't guarantee wins, it does increase the probability. The Texas Lottery Commission investigated her wins and found no wrongdoing. Ginther herself refused to speak to the media and disappeared from public view after her final win. To this day, no one knows for certain whether her success was pure luck, mathematical genius, or something else entirely. If you enjoy our videos about amazing facts, myths, and bold debunking of lies, support us with a like and write the number 1 in the comments. If not, write 0. This way we'll understand what interests you and make our episodes even better. Let's dig deeper. 5th case. In 1952, a man named Tsutomu Yamaguchi was in Hiroshima on a business trip when the atomic bomb was dropped. He was less than 2 miles from the explosion. The blast threw him to the ground, ruptured his eardrums, and burned his face and arms. Despite his injuries, he spent the night in an air raid shelter and then took a train back to his hometown the next day. That hometown was Nagasaki. 3 days later, while he was explaining to his supervisor what had happened in Hiroshima, the second atomic bomb was dropped. He survived again. Yamaguchi lived until 2010, dying at the age of 93 from stomach cancer. He was officially recognized by the Japanese government as the only person to survive both atomic bombings. In interviews, he described the bombs as creating a flash brighter than the sun, followed by a shockwave that felt like the world was ending. He said that surviving once was miraculous, but surviving twice made him feel like he had a responsibility to tell the world about the horrors of nuclear war. He spent his later years advocating for nuclear disarmament, traveling the world to share his story. Doctors were baffled by his longevity given the massive radiation exposure he endured. Some speculated that his body had an unusually strong resistance to radiation, but there's no scientific explanation for why he didn't die from radiation sickness like so many others. Now pay attention. 6th case. In 2003, a Croatian music teacher named Ante Krasic was driving home when he swerved to avoid a truck. His car went off a cliff and landed in a ravine 300 feet below. The vehicle was completely destroyed, but Ante was found sitting on a rock nearby smoking a cigarette. He had no memory of how he got out of the car. Rescuers assumed he had been thrown clear during the crash, but the car's doors were still shut when they arrived. Medical exams showed he had only minor bruises and a concussion. He told reporters that he remembered the car going over the edge, then nothing until he woke up outside the wreckage. Some suggested he experienced a dissociative fugue state caused by the trauma, allowing him to escape without conscious awareness. Others believed he was simply too disoriented to remember. Either way, the fact that he survived such a catastrophic crash with minimal injuries defied all expectations. Ante returned to teaching music a few weeks later and said he never drove that route again. And here's what raises questions. 7th case. In 2006, a construction worker named Alcides Moreno was cleaning windows on a 47-story building in New York City when the scaffolding collapsed. He and his brother Edgar plummeted nearly 500 feet. Edgar died instantly, but Alcides survived. He landed on a small pile of wooden planks and metal debris, which somehow absorbed enough of the impact to prevent immediate death. He suffered massive injuries, brain trauma, spinal fractures, broken ribs, collapsed lungs, and shattered legs. Doctors gave him almost no chance of survival. He was in a coma for weeks and underwent dozens of surgeries, but he woke up. And over the next year, he relearned how to walk, talk, and move. His recovery was so extraordinary that medical journals published case studies trying to understand how he survived. Physicists calculated that the force of his impact should have been equivalent to being hit by a truck traveling at over 100 miles per hour. Yet he lived. Some doctors called it divine intervention. Others said it was a freak combination of how he landed and the debris that cushioned the fall. Alcides himself said he had no memory of the fall or the impact, just waking up in the hospital months later. But there is another version. Eighth case. In 1960, a Finnish soldier named Aimo Koivunen was skiing through the wilderness during World War II when his unit was ambushed by Soviet forces. Low on supplies and exhausted, he took a large dose of methamphetamine pills, the entire supply meant for his squad. He lost all sense of time and direction. He skied over 200 miles in a drug-fueled haze, evading enemy patrols, surviving freezing temperatures and going days without food. At one point, he stepped on a landmine, but it didn't detonate properly and only injured his foot. He later said he had hallucinations of being chased by wolves and seeing visions of home. When he was finally found by Finnish soldiers, he weighed 86 pounds and had a heart rate so high it couldn't be measured accurately. His body temperature was dangerously low and he was barely conscious. Doctors expected him to die from organ failure or cardiac arrest, but he recovered fully within weeks. The amount of methamphetamine he consumed should have killed him outright, but instead it kept him moving long enough to survive. Military historians later used his case as an example of how extreme stress and stimulants can push the human body beyond normal limits. And then another detail emerges. Ninth case. In 2015, a fisherman named Harrison O'Keefe was working on a tugboat off the coast of Nigeria when the vessel capsized and sank. The boat settled on the ocean floor at a depth of 100 feet. Harrison was trapped in a tiny air pocket inside the ship. He had no light, no food, and no way to signal for help. He could hear fish swimming outside and the creaking of the wreckage. He assumed he would die. After 60 hours, a rescue diver arrived to recover bodies from the wreck. The diver shone a flashlight into the darkness and saw a hand reach out. Harrison had survived by breathing the limited air in the pocket, which was slowly being depleted by carbon dioxide. Experts later said that the pressure at that depth should have caused nitrogen narcosis and oxygen toxicity, both of which are usually fatal. But Harrison remained conscious and calm enough to wait for rescue. He was brought to the surface using decompression procedures and survived without major injury. He later said he spent the entire time praying and listening to the ocean. He never returned to the sea and now works on land. Here is an important detail. 10th case. In 1945, a chicken named Mike had his head partially cut off by a farmer in Colorado. The axe missed the jugular vein and left part of the brainstem intact. Mike didn't die. He lived for 18 months without a head. The farmer, Lloyd Olson, kept him alive by feeding him with an eyedropper directly into his esophagus. Mike became a sideshow attraction, traveling across the United States and earning thousands of dollars. Scientists examined him and confirmed that he was indeed alive, with basic motor functions and reflexes still operating. He eventually died when a piece of food got lodged in his throat and he choked. The case became famous in medical and veterinary circles as an example of how resilient biological systems can be. Some skeptics questioned whether Mike was truly conscious or just operating on reflex, but witnesses said he attempted to preen his feathers and crow, suggesting some level of awareness. And that's not all. 11th case. In 2007, a skydiver named Michael Holmes was filming a jump over New Zealand when both his main parachute and reserve parachute failed. He fell 14,000 feet and crashed into a blackberry bush. The impact was recorded on his helmet camera. He suffered a collapsed lung and broken ankle, but survived. The video shows him spinning uncontrollably, trying desperately to deploy his chutes, then accepting his fate in the final seconds before impact. He later said he felt strangely peaceful as he fell, knowing there was nothing he could do. The blackberry bush, combined with soft soil from recent rain, absorbed just enough of the impact to prevent fatal injuries. Parachute experts analyzed the footage and confirmed that both chutes had malfunctioned due to a packing error. Michael returned to skydiving a year later, saying that the experience made him appreciate life more. He now works as a skydiving instructor and uses his story to emphasize the importance of proper equipment checks. And here is where it gets really strange. 12th case. In 2011, a Brazilian man named Eduardo Leite was fishing in the Amazon River when he was attacked by a crocodile. The animal clamped its jaws around his head and dragged him underwater. Eduardo's friend grabbed a knife and stabbed the crocodile repeatedly until it released him. Eduardo surfaced with deep puncture wounds across his skull and face, but he was alive. Doctors said the crocodile's teeth had missed his brain and major arteries by millimeters. He underwent surgery to repair the damage and recovered fully. He returned to fishing a few months later, saying that he refused to let fear control his life. The attack was filmed by a tourist on the riverbank, and the footage went viral, sparking debates about the dangers of fishing in crocodile-infested waters. Eduardo said he now carries a knife at all times and avoids certain parts of the river. The next point is no less amazing. 13th case. In 1998, a woman named Ann Hodges was napping on her couch in Alabama when a meteorite crashed through her roof, bounced off a radio, and struck her in the hip. She became the first confirmed person in history to be hit by a meteorite. The rock weighed 8.5 pounds and left a massive bruise, but she survived. The meteorite became a subject of legal disputes, with her landlord claiming ownership. Eventually, Anne donated it to a museum. Scientists confirmed it was an authentic meteorite that had traveled through space for millions of years before hitting her. Anne said she never felt lucky. In fact, she felt cursed because the incident brought unwanted attention and stress. She lived until 2003 and rarely spoke about the meteorite in her later years. And here's what's really interesting. 14th case. In 2013, a man named Stephen Wooldridge was scuba diving off the coast of California when he was swallowed whole by a whale. He was inside the whale's mouth for several seconds before the animal spit him out. He suffered no injuries, just shock and disbelief. Marine biologists later explained that the whale was a humpback, which filters food through baleen plates and cannot swallow large objects. The whale likely realized its mistake and expelled him immediately. Stephen said the experience was surreal. He remembered darkness, the smell of fish, and the sensation of being surrounded by water and flesh. He continued diving after the incident but avoided areas where whales were feeding. The next detail may surprise you. 15th case. In 2016, a teenager named Bahia Bakari was the sole survivor of a plane crash off the coast of the Comoros Islands. The aircraft broke apart on impact with the ocean, killing 152 people. Bahia, who couldn't swim, clung to a piece of wreckage for 13 hours in shark-infested waters before being rescued. She suffered a broken collarbone and cuts, but she survived. Rescue teams said it was a miracle she wasn't attacked by sharks or didn't drown from exhaustion. She later said she kept herself awake by thinking about her mother, who had died in the crash. Psychologists noted that her survival was a combination of physical endurance and mental resilience. She now advocates for improved aviation safety and works with organizations that support trauma survivors. But there is a nuance. 16th case. In 2008, a man named Shavash Karapetyan, a former Olympic swimmer, was jogging in Armenia when he saw a bus drive off a bridge and into a reservoir. The bus sank quickly, trapping dozens of passengers inside. Shavash dove into the freezing water and broke through a window. He pulled 20 people to the surface one by one over the course of 30 minutes. He suffered hypothermia, lacerations from the broken glass, and severe lung damage from inhaling contaminated water. He was hospitalized for weeks and never fully recovered his athletic abilities. Doctors said most people would have died from the cold or drowned from exhaustion, but Shavash's training and sheer willpower kept him going. He was awarded numerous medals for heroism and became a national icon. He later said he didn't think about the danger. He just acted. But the physical toll was immense, and he lived with chronic health issues for the rest of his life. And here's another example. 17th case. In 2004, a man named Anatoly Bugorsky was working at a particle accelerator in Russia when a safety mechanism failed. A beam of protons traveling at nearly the speed of light passed through his skull. He felt no pain but saw a flash brighter than 1,000 suns. Doctors expected him to die within days from radiation poisoning. But he survived. The beam had burned a path through his brain tissue, leaving permanent damage to the left side of his face, which became paralyzed. He also suffered hearing loss and seizures, but he retained his cognitive functions and continued working as a physicist. His case became one of the most studied in medical history because no one had ever been exposed to such concentrated radiation and lived. Bugorsky himself said he considered himself lucky to be alive, even with the permanent injuries. He lived into his 70s and gave occasional interviews about the incident. it's time to move on. 18th case. In 2010, a miner named Edison Peña was trapped underground in Chile when a mine collapsed. He and 32 other miners were stuck for 69 days in a small chamber with limited food, water, and air. The world watched as rescue efforts continued. Edison kept himself sane by running laps in the tunnels, sometimes up to 6 miles a day in complete darkness. When they were finally rescued, he was one of the healthiest miners, both physically and mentally. Doctors said his exercise routine helped him maintain muscle mass and mental clarity. Edison later ran the New York City Marathon as a symbol of his survival. He said the experience taught him that the human body and mind are capable of far more than we realize. The rescue became one of the most famous in history, and all 33 miners survived. Here hides an important point. 19th case. In 2018, a man named John Smith fell through ice into a frozen lake in Missouri. He was underwater for 15 minutes before rescuers pulled him out. He had no pulse and wasn't breathing. Doctors pronounced him dead, but his mother refused to accept it and prayed over his body in the hospital. After 45 minutes, his heartbeat returned. He was in a coma for weeks, and doctors expected severe brain damage due to oxygen deprivation. But he woke up with full cognitive function and no lasting injuries. Medical professionals called it inexplicable. Some attributed it to the freezing water slowing his metabolism and preserving brain function. Others called it a miracle. John said he had no memory of the incident but felt grateful for a second chance. He now speaks publicly about his experience and has inspired research into cold water survival. And here's what is usually not mentioned. 20th case. In 2019, a woman named Maggie was hiking in the mountains of Montana when she encountered a grizzly bear. The bear attacked, biting her head, arms, and torso. She played dead, and the bear eventually lost interest and walked away. She crawled to a nearby trail and was found by hikers who called for help. She survived despite massive injuries, including a fractured skull and deep lacerations. Surgeons performed multiple operations to repair the damage. She later said the key to her survival was staying calm and not provoking the bear further. Wildlife experts confirmed that playing dead is often the best strategy during a grizzly attack, as the bear typically loses interest once it perceives no threat. Maggie returned to hiking a year later, though she now carries bear spray and avoids certain trails. There is a continuation. 21st case. In 2001, a window washer named Alcides Moreno's brother Edgar fell from a scaffold and died. But Alcides, as mentioned earlier, survived a similar fall years later. This coincidence raises questions about whether some families have genetic traits that make them more resilient to trauma. Scientists have studied cases of people who survive extreme injuries and found that certain genes related to blood clotting, bone density, and pain tolerance may play a role. However, luck and environmental factors are still the dominant reasons for survival in most cases. The idea that some people are genetically luckier remains speculative but intriguing, and now a fact that is rarely discussed. 22nd case. In 2014, a man named Roy Sullivan, a park ranger in Virginia, was struck by lightning 7 times over the course of his career. He survived every strike. The first happened in 1942 and the last in 1977. Each strike left him with burns, hearing loss, and other injuries, but he always recovered. The odds of being struck by lightning 7 times are estimated at 1 in 10 quadrillion. Sullivan became known as the human lightning rod. He carried a bucket of water in his truck in case his hair caught fire, which happened more than once. Despite his incredible luck in surviving, he lived in constant fear of being struck again. He died in 1983 from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, reportedly due to depression unrelated to the lightning strikes. His case remains one of the most statistically improbable in history. From this moment, the most interesting part begins. 23rd case. In 2012, a surfer named Todd Endress was attacked by a great white shark off the coast of California. The shark bit him multiple times, shredding his back and legs. A pod of dolphins intervened, forming a protective circle around him and driving the shark away. Todd was pulled to shore by fellow surfers and survived after extensive surgery. Marine biologists said dolphin behavior like this is rare but not unheard of. as dolphins are known to protect humans from sharks. Todd said he remembers the dolphins nudging him toward the beach and believes they saved his life. He returned to surfing a year later and now advocates for ocean conservation. And then, an unexpected twist. 24th case. In 2017, a man named Harrison Ojegba Okeen, the same fisherman mentioned earlier, survived another maritime disaster. This time, his boat was attacked by pirates off the coast of Nigeria. He hid in a small compartment for hours while the pirates ransacked the vessel. When they left, he emerged unharmed. The fact that he survived 2 life-threatening situations on the ocean led some to call him cursed, while others saw him as extraordinarily lucky. He said he now works on land and refuses to return to the sea, believing he has used up all his luck. This moment changes everything. 25th case. In 2005, a woman named Vesna Vulovic, a flight attendant, was on a plane that exploded mid-air over Czechoslovakia. She fell 33,000 feet and survived. She was found in the wreckage with a fractured skull, broken vertebrae, and shattered legs. She was in a coma for days and woke up paralyzed from the waist down. Over time, she regained the ability to walk. She held the Guinness World Record for surviving the highest fall without a parachute. Experts believe she survived because she was in the tail section of the plane, which hit the ground at an angle, and because she was unconscious during the fall, which prevented her body from tensing up. She lived until 2016 and said she had no memory of the fall itself. Let's look at the next point, 26th case. In 2016, a man named Jan Balsrud escaped from Nazi soldiers in Norway during World War II. He trekked through the Arctic wilderness for weeks with frostbitten feet, evading capture. He eventually had to amputate 9 of his own toes with a pocket knife to prevent gangrene. He survived and was rescued by resistance fighters. His story became legendary in Norway, and he was later awarded numerous honours for his bravery. Doctors said the fact that he survived the amputation without proper medical tools or anesthesia was extraordinary. He lived until 1988 and rarely spoke about the ordeal, saying it was simply what had to be done to survive. Let's move forward. 27th case. In 2013, a woman named Ewa Wisniewska was paragliding in Australia when she was sucked into a thunderstorm. She was lifted to an altitude of 33,000 feet, where temperatures dropped to -50 degrees Celsius. She was pelted by hail and covered in ice. She lost consciousness but somehow descended safely and landed in a field. She suffered frostbite and bruising but survived. Meteorologists said the updrafts in the storm should have torn her apart or caused her to suffocate from lack of oxygen. Her survival was attributed to sheer luck and the fact that she remained attached to her paraglider, which slowed her descent. She returned to paragliding a year later, saying the experience made her more cautious but didn't diminish her love for the sport. Now, what is often hidden? 28th case. In 2018, a man named Ricky McGee was stranded in the Australian outback for 71 days after his car broke down. He survived by eating leeches, frogs and grasshoppers. He lost over 100 pounds and was near death when he was found by cattle ranchers. Doctors said he should have died from dehydration, starvation, or infection. His survival was credited to his knowledge of the land and his ability to find small sources of water. He later said the hardest part wasn't the hunger, but the isolation and fear that no one would find him. He recovered fully and now gives talks about survival skills. 29th case. In 2009, a man named Aaron Ralston was hiking in Utah when a boulder pinned his arm against a canyon wall. He was trapped for 5 days with no way to call for help. He eventually amputated his own arm with a dull multi-tool knife to free himself. He rappelled down a 65-foot cliff and hiked out of the canyon where he was rescued. His story became the basis for the film 127 Hours. Doctors said the amputation was done under conditions that should have caused him to bleed to death, but he used a tourniquet made from his climbing equipment to control the bleeding. He now works as a motivational speaker and continues to climb mountains. 30th case. In 2010, a woman named Bethany Hamilton was surfing in Hawaii when a tiger shark bit off her left arm. She was 13 years old. Despite the injury, she returned to competitive surfing and became a professional athlete. She won national championships and inspired millions with her story. Doctors said her survival was due to quick action by her friends who applied a tourniquet and got her to a hospital within minutes. She later said she never considered giving up surfing because it was her passion. She now advocates for shark conservation and works with young athletes. 31st case. In 2011, a man named Joe Simpson was climbing in the Andes when he fell and broke his leg. His climbing partner, Simon Yates, tried to lower him down the mountain but had to cut the rope when Joe became dead weight. Joe fell into a crevasse and was presumed dead, but he survived and crawled out of the crevasse, then dragged himself across a glacier for 3 days to reach base camp. He was severely dehydrated and frostbitten, but alive. His story became a book and documentary called Touching the Void. Doctors said his survival was due to mental toughness and the fact that he found small sources of water in the ice. He recovered and continued climbing. 32nd case. In 2012, a man named Stephen Callahan was adrift in the Atlantic Ocean for 76 days after his sailboat sank. He survived on a life raft, catching fish and rainwater. He lost a third of his body weight and suffered from dehydration and exposure. He was eventually rescued by fishermen off the coast of Guadeloupe. His survival manual, which he wrote afterward, became a standard text for maritime survival training. He said the key to his survival was maintaining hope and staying mentally active. He now works as a marine survival consultant. 33rd case. In 2015, a man named Hugh Glass was mauled by a grizzly bear in the American wilderness in the 1800s. His companions left him for dead, but he crawled 200 miles to the nearest settlement over the course of 6 weeks. He survived on berries, roots, and scavenged meat. His story became the basis for the film The Revenant. Historians confirmed that the events were largely accurate, though some details were embellished. Glass later tracked down the men who abandoned him but chose not to kill them, saying revenge wasn't worth it. He lived for several more years before being killed in a conflict with Native Americans. So, what does all this tell us? Some of these stories have been verified by multiple sources, while others rely on personal accounts that are difficult to confirm. The common thread is that survival often comes down to a combination of luck, quick thinking, and physical resilience. But there's no single explanation for why some people survive impossible situations while others don't. Medical science can explain some of it, how the body responds to trauma, how adrenaline affects decision-making. But luck remains the great unknown. Whether you believe in fate, probability, or divine intervention, these cases remind us that life can change in an instant. And sometimes, against all odds, people find a way to endure. Some researchers have studied patterns in extreme survival cases, looking for commonalities that might explain why certain individuals live through catastrophic events. They've found that survivors often share traits like adaptability, calmness under pressure, and the ability to make split-second decisions. But these traits alone don't guarantee survival. The environment plays a crucial role. The angle of impact, the presence of water or snow, even the thickness of vegetation can mean the difference between life and death. In many cases, survivors themselves admit they have no explanation for why they lived when others didn't. They speak of feeling guided by instinct, experiencing time distortion, or simply accepting their fate and then waking up alive. These psychological factors are harder to measure than physical ones, but they may be just as important. What we do know is that the human body is far more resilient than we often give it credit for, capable of enduring conditions that seem incompatible with life. At the same time, these stories raise uncomfortable questions about probability and fairness. For every person who survives a plane crash or a lightning strike, thousands of others die in similar circumstances. Is it truly random, or are there factors we haven't yet identified? Some scientists argue that survival comes down to microscopic variables: the exact position of a body during impact, the precise temperature of water, the specific trajectory of a fall. Others believe that consciousness and willpower play a role that science can't fully explain. Survivors often describe moments of clarity or decision-making that seem almost supernatural in hindsight. Whether you interpret these moments as luck, divine intervention, or the brain's survival mechanisms kicking into overdrive, the fact remains that we don't have all the answers. And perhaps that's what makes these stories so compelling. They remind us that for all our scientific knowledge, life still holds mysteries. Thank you for watching. If these stories fascinated you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We'll continue exploring the most incredible, strange, and unexplained facts from around the world. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a moment of extraordinary luck? We'd love to hear your stories. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.